The Cold War cast a long shadow over the world. It was a time of great tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides possessed nuclear weapons. This created a climate of fear and mistrust. The two superpowers never directly fought, but they engaged in proxy wars and espionage. Each side sought to expand its sphere of influence. The US promoted democracy and capitalism. The USSR advocated for communism. This ideological conflict fueled numerous international crises. One such crisis would bring the world to the brink of nuclear war, the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev made a fateful decision that would alter the course of history. He agreed to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, a bold move that would bring the world to the brink of nuclear war. This island nation was a mere 90 miles off the coast of Florida, making it a strategic location for the Soviets. Khrushchev had several motivations for this risky endeavor. First, he wanted to bolster the defenses of Cuba's fledgling communist regime, which had recently come under threat. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, backed by the US, had heightened Soviet concerns about Cuba's vulnerability. This invasion attempt had shown the fragility of the Cuban government and the lengths to which the US would go to overthrow it. Furthermore, Khrushchev perceived an imbalance in the nuclear balance of power that needed to be addressed. The United States had a significant advantage in long-range missiles, with numerous intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of striking the Soviet Union. These American missiles could reach the Soviet Union from bases in Europe and Turkey, posing a direct threat to Soviet security. By placing missiles in Cuba, Khrushchev aimed to create a counterbalance, allowing the Soviets to target the US mainland with ease and thus deter any potential aggression. This, Khrushchev believed, would level the playing field and ensure that the Soviet Union was not at a strategic disadvantage in the nuclear arms race. Beyond military considerations, Khrushchev also saw the deployment of missiles as a way to enhance the Soviet Union's global standing. By directly challenging the United States in the Western Hemisphere, Khrushchev aimed to project an image of Soviet strength and resolve. He hoped to demonstrate to the world, particularly newly independent nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, that the Soviet Union was a force to be reckoned with. This bold move, he calculated, would bolster Soviet prestige and undermine US credibility on the world stage. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961 played a significant role in Khrushchev's calculus. The invasion, orchestrated by the CIA to topple Fidel Castro's communist government, ended in disaster. It emboldened Khrushchev, leading him to underestimate the resolve of the young Kennedy administration. The botched operation, in Khrushchev's eyes, revealed American weakness and indecision. It reinforced his belief that the US would not risk a full-scale confrontation over Cuba. This miscalculation would have profound implications as the crisis unfolded. Section 5. A strategic chessboard, potential advantages for the Soviet Union. From a strategic standpoint, the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba offered several potential benefits. First, it significantly enhanced the Soviet Union's ability to strike the United States. With missiles stationed just 90 miles from Florida, the Soviets could target key US cities and military installations with little warning time. Second, the move served as a counterbalance to the US Jupiter missiles deployed in Turkey. These missiles, capable of reaching Moscow and other major Soviet cities, had long been a source of anxiety for Khrushchev. By establishing a similar capability in Cuba, he aimed to create a deterrent. Section 6. Miscalculations and miscommunications, the risks underestimated. Despite the potential benefits, Khrushchev's decision to place missiles in Cuba carried enormous risks. The move was a major gamble, one that could easily escalate into a full-blown nuclear war. Khrushchev underestimated the US response. He believed the Americans would accept the missiles as a fait accompli. He misjudged President John F. Kennedy's determination to remove the missiles. Kennedy viewed the Soviet deployment as a direct threat to US national security. he was unwilling to allow the missiles to remain. Section 7. 13 days on the brink, the world holds its breath. The world watched in horror as the two superpowers edged closer to the brink. For 13 tense days in October 1962, the possibility of nuclear war loomed large. The crisis unfolded in a flurry of diplomatic exchanges, military maneuvers, and public pronouncements. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade on Cuba, vowing to prevent any further Soviet shipments from reaching the island. Khrushchev, facing intense pressure from both the US and his own advisors, eventually agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a US pledge not to invade Cuba. Section 8. A Cold War Compromise, the Resolution and its Aftermath. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a watershed moment in the Cold War, a confrontation that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. It brought the world closer to nuclear annihilation than ever before, with both superpowers on high alert and ready to launch their arsenals. Yet, it also ushered in a period of détente, a thawing of the icy relations that had defined the Cold War up to that point. The crisis underscored the need for clear communication and restraint between nuclear-armed states, highlighting the catastrophic potential of miscommunication. In the aftermath of the crisis, both the US and the Soviet Union took significant steps to reduce tensions and prevent future confrontations. A hotline was established between Washington and Moscow to facilitate direct communication, ensuring that leaders could speak directly in times of crisis. The two countries also signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, a landmark agreement in the history of arms control. This treaty banned nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and outer space, marking a significant step towards reducing the nuclear threat. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the subsequent treaties laid the groundwork for future disarmament talks and peaceful protests against nuclear weapons. It was a turning point that showed the world the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and the relentless pursuit of peace in a nuclear age. Section 9. The Legacy of the Crisis. A New Era of Communication. The Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a stark reminder of the perils of miscalculation and the importance of diplomacy in the nuclear age. The crisis highlighted the need for clear channels of communication, the dangers of brinkmanship, and the shared responsibility of nuclear-armed states to prevent catastrophic conflict. The legacy of the crisis is a mixed one. On the one hand, it demonstrated the terrifying potential consequences of Cold War rivalry. On the other hand, it spurred efforts to manage superpower competition and reduce the risk of nuclear war. Section 10. Khrushchev's Gamble. A calculated risk or a grave miscalculation. Was Khrushchev's decision to place missiles in Cuba a grave miscalculation? Or was it a calculated risk that he believed would shift the balance of power in favor of the Soviet Union? The answer is complex and depends on one's perspective. Historians and political analysts have long debated the motivations and consequences of this bold move. From a purely strategic viewpoint, the move was a high-stakes gamble that ultimately backfired. Khrushchev aimed to counteract the US missiles in Turkey and Italy, but the plan led to a near-catastrophic confrontation. Khrushchev overestimated his ability to intimidate the United States and underestimated Kennedy's willingness to risk war to remove the missiles. The US response was swift and resolute, leading to a tense standoff that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. However, Khrushchev's actions must be viewed within the broader context of the Cold War. The era was marked by intense rivalry and a constant struggle for supremacy between the two superpowers. He was operating in a world of heightened tensions, ideological rivalry, and mutual mistrust. The deployment of missiles in Cuba was seen as a way to level the playing field and assert Soviet strength. From his perspective, the deployment of missiles in Cuba was a necessary step to redress the nuclear imbalance and protect Soviet interests. It was a bold move intended to send a clear message to the United States and its allies. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a defining moment of the Cold War, continues to be a subject of debate and analysis. It was a period of intense fear and uncertainty, with the world watching as the two superpowers faced off. Khrushchev's actions, while risky and ultimately unsuccessful, reflected the complexities and dangers of a world divided. His gamble highlighted the precarious nature of international relations during the Cold War. The crisis serves as a timeless reminder of the importance of diplomacy, communication, and restraint in navigating the challenges of the international system. It underscores the need for careful consideration and measured actions in the face of global tensions.